the silent scream Dr. Alina Vasquez knelt beside a cluster of crystalline flowers that seemed to hum with their own internal melody, and her hands trembled slightly as she carefully extracted a sample from the alien plant that could revolutionize medicine across 17 different species. The research vessel Harmony's Dream floated peacefully in orbit around Kepler-4 for to see, and the soft blue glow from the planet's twin moons created an almost magical atmosphere in the ship's botanical laboratory, where Alina had spent the last 6 months cataloging the most incredible discovery of her career. The ship housed a crew of 38 researchers from 12 different species, and they had come to this remote system following reports of unusual plant life that seemed to possess healing properties, unlike anything previously documented in galactic databases. Elena's partner, Dr. Cathara, from the Zapparian Collective, worked quietly at the adjacent station, and her 4 delicate arms moved with precision as she prepared genetic samples that would be sent back to the Galactic Research Council for further study. Captain David Torres walked through the research deck, and his weathered face showed the quiet satisfaction of a man who had spent 20 years shepherding scientists through the dangerous regions of unexplored space. The Harmony's Dream was not a military vessel and carried only basic defensive shields because the Galactic Accords protected scientific expeditions from interference by hostile forces, and most species respected the neutrality of research missions that benefited everyone. The ship's artificial intelligence, called Aria, monitored communications from across the galaxy and provided regular updates on weather patterns and stellar phenomena that could affect their mission, and Alina often found comfort in the AI's gentle voice that reminded her of her grandmother back on Earth. Dr. Cathara looked up from her work, and her large, violet eyes showed excitement as she discovered that the crystalline flowers contained compounds that could regenerate damaged neural tissue in mammals, and the implications were staggering for treating injuries that had previously been considered permanent. Alina felt a deep sense of purpose as she worked, because her research could help millions of beings across the galaxy live better lives, and she had devoted her career to finding natural solutions to medical problems that plagued different species. The botanical samples they had collected represented 3 years of careful exploration and documentation, and Alina knew that their work would establish this system as a protected research zone where future scientists could continue studying these remarkable organisms. The emergency alarms began screaming through the ship's corridors, and Alina dropped her sample container as the peaceful quiet of the laboratory was shattered by flashing red lights that meant immediate danger. Captain Torres' voice came over the communication system, and his calm professional tone could not hide the fear that made his words tight with tension as he announced that unknown vessels had appeared on their sensors and were approaching at high speed with weapons powered and targeting systems active. Alina looked through the laboratory's observation port and saw 3 massive ships emerging from hyperspace, and their dark hulls bristled with weapon ports and sensor arrays that marked them as raiders, rather than legitimate military or commercial vessels. Dr. Cathara moved closer to Alina, and her natural empathic abilities allowed her to sense the fear and confusion radiating from every crew member aboard the Harmony's Dream, as they realized that their peaceful mission had suddenly become a fight for survival. The ship shuddered as the attacking vessels fired warning shots across their bow, and Captain Torres attempted to communicate with the raiders using standard diplomatic protocols while broadcasting their status as a protected scientific expedition. The response came in the form of electromagnetic pulse weapons that disabled their engines and left the Harmony's Dream floating helpless in space, while boarding pods launched from the raider ships and moved toward their hull like metallic insects seeking prey. Alina heard the terrible sound of metal being cut and torn as the raiders forced their way through the outer airlock, and she grabbed Dr. Cathara's hand as they moved toward the emergency shelter that every research ship maintained for situations exactly like this. The attacking force belonged to the scale of marauders, and they were led by a brutal commander named Vexter, who had earned his reputation by capturing entire research expeditions and selling the crews into slavery, while keeping their valuable discoveries for himself. The raiders moved through the ship's corridors with the confidence of predators who had never faced serious opposition, and their reptilian features unscaled armor made them appear even more terrifying as they herded the research crew into the main cargo bay. Commander Vextar stood nearly 8 feet tall, and his yellow eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he examined the scientists who would bring premium prices in the outer rim slave markets, where educated captives were valued for their knowledge and skills. Alina managed to activate her personal emergency beacon while pretending to stumble, and the small device began broadcasting a distress signal on frequencies monitored by military and civilian vessels throughout known space. The signal contained her identification codes and the ship's location coordinates, along with automated data about their attackers and the nature of their emergency, and Lena could only hope that someone would receive the message and come to help them. Dr. Cathara squeezed Elena's hand as they were forced into the cargo bay with their fellow researchers, and the Zephyrian's empathic abilities allowed her to provide some comfort to the younger crew members who had never experienced violence or danger in their sheltered academic lives. Commander Vextar laughed as he looked at the assembled prisoners, and he explained that their research data would be sold to the highest bidder, while they themselves would be transported to markets where slavers paid well for educated specimens. The distress beacon continued, transmitting its desperate message as it raced through hyperspace at faster than light speed, and carried with it the coordinates and identification codes that would allow rescuers to find them if anyone was willing to risk confronting the scale of marauders. Alina closed her eyes and thought about her family on Earth, and wondered if she would ever see them again. While around her, the raiders began cataloging their prisoners and discussing the potential value of each crew member. On Terra Station orbiting Earth, Admiral Marcus Kane was reviewing fleet deployment reports when his communication officer, Lieutenant Sarah Cross, brought him the emergency signal that had just arrived from the Outer Rim territories. Kane read the message quickly, and his expression grew darker as he realized that peaceful researchers, including civilians from multiple species, were under attack by raiders and needed immediate assistance from any military vessel capable of providing aid. Most distress signals would be forwarded to the nearest patrol ship or handled by whatever forces happened to be in the area, but Kane noticed something in the crew manifest that changed everything about how he would respond to this particular emergency. The research team included 8 doctoral students under the age of 25, and these young people had been pursuing advanced degrees in xenobotany and medical research, and were essentially children by the standards of most galactic species. Kane's fingers moved across his command console as he activated what human military doctrine called Code Absolute, and within minutes, every human military vessel within 5 star systems began receiving deployment orders that classified this as a Priority 1 emergency requiring immediate response with maximum available force. The Admiral opened a communication channel to fleet commanders across human space, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had spent 35 years protecting those who could not protect themselves. Captain Sarah Mitchell was conducting training exercises aboard the heavy destroyer Relentless when the Code Absolute alert came through, and every drill stopped immediately as her crew focused on their new orders with the intensity that came from knowing that innocent people needed help. The ship's navigation officer began calculating jump coordinates, while the weapons department ran final checks on their rail cannons and missile systems, because, when civilians were threatened, humans responded with overwhelming force rather than minimal intervention. Across human-controlled space, the same scene repeated as ships abandoned their current missions and began converging on the distress. Coordinates and civilian vessels volunteered to serve as medical transports and supply ships, while military contractors offered their services free of charge. The response was unprecedented in its scale and speed as humanity demonstrated that threatening innocent researchers was equivalent to declaring war on human civilization itself. Elena watched helplessly as the raiders continued their work, and she did not know that the largest rescue fleet in galactic history was forming to save 38 people. They had never met, because that was how humans responded when peaceful scientists asked for help. Commander Vextar had no idea that his casual act of piracy had triggered a response that would forever change how other species viewed humanity and their reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous protectors. The storm arrived 6 hours had passed since the attack began, and Dr. Elena Vasquez sat in the corner of the cargo bay trying to provide comfort to Dr. Cathara and the younger researchers who had never imagined that their academic careers would lead them into such danger. Commander Vextar moved among the prisoners like a predator, evaluating his prey, and his yellow eyes lingered on the doctoral students because young, educated slaves brought premium prices from buyers who valued intelligence and trainability over physical strength. The Scaleth raiders had been systematically stripping the Harmonies' dream of everything valuable, and their efficiency suggested years of experience in capturing research vessels and stealing scientific discoveries that could be sold to the highest bidder. Elena noticed that they paid particular attention to her botanical samples, and she realized with growing horror that months of careful research would be used by criminals rather than helping people who desperately needed new medical treatments. Dr. Cathara used her empathic abilities to monitor the emotional state of their captors, and she could sense growing impatience among the raiders as they worked to decrypt the ship's computer systems and access the most valuable research data. Commander Vextar grew increasingly frustrated as human encryption protocols proved more difficult to break than he had anticipated, and Elena took some small satisfaction in knowing that her people had made their work harder. The space around Kepler 442c remained empty and silent, except for the 4 ships involved in the raid, and Elena began to wonder if her distress beacon had been received by anyone capable of mounting a rescue operation. Most civilian vessels would avoid confronting armed raiders, and military patrols in this remote region were few and far between because the Galactic Council allocated most of their resources to protecting major trade routes rather than scientific expeditions. Commander Vextar called his subordinates together, and Elena could hear them discussing timeline for completing their operation and departing for the slave markets, where their prisoners would be sold to buyers who specialized in acquiring educated workers for illegal research projects. The Scaleth leader wanted to finish quickly because staying in one location too long increased the risk of interference from patrol ships or other complications that could threaten their profits. Elena closed her eyes and tried to maintain hope, while around her the younger crew members struggled with fear and despair as they contemplated spending the rest of their lives in slavery, far from their families and homeworlds. Dr. Cathara squeezed her hand and whispered that she could sense something changing in the emotional atmosphere around them, but Elena could not understand what the Zephyrian meant until the ship's hull began vibrating with a frequency that suggested massive objects moving through nearby space. The emergency lighting in the cargo bay flickered, and Elena felt a strange sensation in her stomach that reminded her of the gravity fluctuations that occurred when large ships dropped out of hyperspace in close proximity to smaller vessels. Commander Vexstar stopped his conversation with his subordinates and moved quickly to a communication panel where he demanded status reports from his ship's sensor operators, and the responses he received made his scaled features twist with confusion and growing alarm. Through the cargo bay's small observation ports, Alina could see points of light beginning to appear in the darkness of space, and at first she thought they might be stars, becoming visible as the planet's rotation changed their viewing angle. But the lights were moving in formation and growing brighter as they approached, and Alina realized with growing excitement that rescue ships had finally arrived to help them escape from their captors. Commander Vexstar's voice rose to a harsh roar as he demanded explanations from his sensor operators, who reported that 17 ships had just emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation and were broadcasting human military identification codes. The Scaleth leader had never encountered human forces before, but he had heard stories about the species from Earth who were known throughout the galaxy as aggressive warriors who showed no mercy to enemies, who threatened innocent people. Alina felt her heart racing as more ships continued appearing in space around them, and the points of light resolved into the familiar shapes of human military vessels, including heavy cruisers and destroyers that bristled with weapons systems designed for ship-to-ship combat. The rescue fleet formed a perfect sphere around the raider ships, and Alina realized that escape was now impossible for their captors, who found themselves outnumbered and outgunned by professional military forces. Admiral Marcus Kane commanded the rescue operation from his flagship Unconquerable, and the massive dreadnought was accompanied by 16 other vessels, including specialized medical ships and supply transports that demonstrated human commitment to caring for rescued civilians. Kane opened a communication channel that reached every ship in the area, including the captured research vessel, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had devoted his career to protecting those who could not protect themselves. The Admiral's message was broadcast on all frequencies, and he identified himself as Marcus Kane of the Terran Defense Force and informed the raiders that they were in violation of galactic accords regarding attacks on non-combatants, and demanded the immediate release of all prisoners and surrender of their vessels. Alina felt tears of relief streaming down her face as she heard Kane's words, because she knew that human military doctrine called for overwhelming force when protecting innocent people from criminal violence. Commander Vexstar looked at his tactical displays and saw that his 4 ships were suddenly surrounded by a human fleet that could destroy them completely within minutes if the situation escalated to open combat. Any reasonable commander would have immediately surrendered and accepted whatever consequences followed, but the Scaleth leader was driven by pride and arrogance rather than tactical sense, and he made the critical error that would seal his fate. The raider commander opened a communication channel to the human fleet and threatened to execute all prisoners unless Admiral Kane ordered his ships to withdraw from the system immediately. Alina felt her blood turn to ice as she heard Vex's words, because she knew that threatening innocent people was exactly the wrong approach to take when dealing with humans, who were already angry about the attack on peaceful researchers. Admiral Kane's response was immediate and terrifying as his voice became colder than the void between stars, and he informed Commander Vexstar that threatening civilian prisoners was an act of war against humanity itself. The Admiral gave the raider leader exactly 60 seconds to release all hostages and surrender his weapons or face the full military might of the Terran Defense Force, and Alina could hear the deadly certainty in Kane's voice that meant the countdown was not a negotiation, but a final warning. Captain Sarah Mitchell aboard the destroyer. Relentless monitored the communication between Kane and the raider leader, and she felt the familiar cold anger that came when criminals threatened innocent people who had done nothing more dangerous than pursuing scientific knowledge. Her weapons officer ran final targeting checks, while her engineering crew pushed the ship's systems beyond normal limits, because when human civilians were in danger, there was no such thing as excessive force or overwhelming response. The 60 seconds expired, and Commander Vextar had not responded to Admiral Kane's ultimatum, and the human fleet moved into action with precision that demonstrated centuries of military evolution and tactical development. The Relentless fired first, and her rail cannons sent kinetic projectiles at nearly light speed that punched through the armor of the nearest Scaleth ship and disabled every weapon system while carefully avoiding crew quarters and life support systems. Alina watched through the observation port as the human fleet demonstrated the difference between raiders and professional military forces, and every shot was precisely targeted to disable rather than destroy, because humans understood that even criminals deserved the chance to surrender. The Scaleth ships found their weapons destroyed and their engines disabled within minutes, while their life support and communication systems remained intact, because human military doctrine emphasized precision over brutality. Commander Vex realized too late that he had made an enemy of the most dangerous military force in the galaxy, and his proud threats had become desperate pleas for mercy, as he offered to release all prisoners in exchange for safe passage. Admiral Kane's response was swift and final, as he informed the raider leader that threatening innocent people had consequences, and that the Scaleth marauders would face justice for their crimes against peaceful researchers. The rescue operation proceeded with the efficiency that characterized human military interventions, and specialized teams boarded the Harmonies, dreamed to evacuate the prisoners, while medical personnel prepared to treat anyone who had been injured during the attack. Alina felt overwhelming gratitude as human Marines escorted her and her fellow researchers to safety, and she realized that her distress beacon had triggered a response that exceeded her wildest hopes. Dr. Cathara used her empathic abilities to help calm the younger crew members as they were transferred to human medical ships, where doctors and counselors waited to provide both physical and psychological care. Alina learned that the rescue fleet included enough medical personnel to staff a major hospital and enough supplies to care for thousands of patients, because humans believed that saving people meant addressing all their needs rather than simply removing them from immediate danger. Admiral Kane personally welcomed the rescued researchers aboard his flagship, and Alina was struck by the genuine concern in his eyes as he assured her that they were safe and would be provided with everything needed for complete recovery. The Admiral explained that attacking peaceful scientists was considered one of the most serious crimes in human military law, and that the Scaleth raiders would face trial for their actions. Throughout the galaxy, communications networks carried news of the human response to the attack on the Harmony's Dream, and other species watched in amazement as they realized that Earth had deployed 17 warships to rescue 38 people from a single research expedition. The scale of the response demonstrated something fundamental about human nature that other civilizations had never fully understood, and Lena realized that she had witnessed the moment when humanity's reputation as protectors rather than conquerors was established forever. Commander Vextar and his raiders were taken into custody and would face trial under Galactic Council jurisdiction, while their ships were impounded as evidence of their crimes against peaceful researchers. Alina watched from the observation deck of Admiral Kane's flagship as the human fleet prepared to escort the Harmonies Dream back to safe space, and she felt profound gratitude for belonging to a species that would mobilize entire fleets to protect innocent people who asked for help. The rescue operation became legendary throughout the galaxy as an example of human commitment to protecting those who could not protect themselves, and Alina knew that future researchers would work with greater confidence, knowing that Earth stood ready to defend peaceful scientific expeditions wherever they might venture into unknown space. The message was clear to every criminal organization in the galaxy and threatening. Human civilians or their allies would bring swift and overwhelming retaliation from forces that viewed protection of innocence as their highest duty.